particular session is basically on natural disaster and climate change management policies. The challenges of a multi-stakeholder approach in a devolved context. So we do know, of course, that Kenya experiences major climate-related disasters. In particular, these are related to floods and droughts. And we do know that the climate changes that are occurring are basically exacerbating these hazards. And they are increasing in magnitude and in scale. And we need to build resilience against these kinds of threats and risks to our livelihoods, properties, our socio-economic development, and also lives and health. So the questions that we want to address are basically how the current process of devolution has influenced the policies that we have in place. And maybe, as was pointed out in the morning, it is good to remember that in fact many of the policies which are related to disaster management are actually in draft form. It is strategies and plans which have preceded the policies, and those are the things that we do have in place, and we hear about those later on. Also that disaster preparedness and also to some extent responses as well are basically shared responsibilities between the national and the county governments. But in the grapevine we have had, or I've been hearing, at least as a person, that connection isn't working too well. There's a lot of drag and also a lot of disjunction between the two components. Again, we'll hear about that. Then there's the issue of how the different response actors integrate these policies into their own way of intervening. And I think the question there then would be, first of all, if the policies are in draft form, should they really be taken up? And if not, how are they adopting the strategies and plans? And maybe these are things that will be considered by the panelists as well as by yourself. So without much ado, what I'm going to do is that after the four panelists have been presented, we're going to have Djohy. Yes, who will now kind of give his view of the analysis of what the panelists have talked about and give us that view from another part of the continent that maybe we do not have here in Eastern Africa. So I would like to invite then Professor Shipman Dig, Director of the Institute for Climate Change and Adaptation at the University of Nairobi, to make his presentation. I would like to remind you that the summaries of the profiles are in the program booklet, so you can read a little bit more to know who Professor Shipman Dig is. But just to save on time, let me welcome him. Thank you.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. In my talk, I want to emphasize two words: preparedness and protection. And I want to start by showing these two pictures. In this one, we have the Kenyan ferry, and we recently lost 2 lives in Lamu, in coast, not Lamu, Likoni, which is the Kenyan southern coast, due to this ferry, where the car slid from the tail and entered into the ocean, and a mother and a daughter lost their lives. And here we have the European ferry. And look at the differences. The tail here is up, there's a rope there. In our Kenyan one, the tail is down, there is no protection there. Okay? Then you begin to ask, was it an accident or a slow coming disaster, onset disaster? What's the difference between an accident and a slow-coming disaster? Then you look at this young lady carrying a bucket of water. She possibly missed going to school, and she will miss her life career doing such jobs. This one, we have a slow and onset disaster, which appears quite often in Kenya. And the question which we want to ask, can preparedness and prevention avoid those two disasters? If you look at the Greater Horn of Africa, during the last 15 or more years, we have had occurrence of drought quite often. And this drought is persistent, it's continuing. We don't know when it will come. Some think that it will go up to 2023. Some do not know when it will ever end. Now, the question which we want to ask, if we know that the disaster is coming, such as drought or floods, what do we need to do in order to avoid its devastation? And I want to say that we have to have good predictions, good weather predictions, which would advise policy. We need to have the good policy which is implementable, so that we can quantify the impact of the policy and the prediction. Without any prediction, we are not going to go anywhere. Now, I believe there is some words which are missing in our Kenyan and East African and African vocabulary. In my research, I know that the African languages do not have the word maintenance. South of Maghreb and north of Limpopo. Look at your African languages and tell me whether you have the word maintenance. The second thing which I'm wondering is whether the two P's are missing in our African languages. But I looked at my own language and I found that the preparedness and protection, prevention, are in my language. I hope they are also in your language. Why don't we use them more? Why don't we get prepared for these things? For instance, if you take the case of drought, what stops us from planning so that we have resilience to such drought? What stops us from creating projects that would protect human and animal lives? These are possible. For instance, we can create villages, and we can create stocking villages. We can create food banks, which are stocked by food when we have plenty. But we don't have any. When the drought comes, you see people dying, you see animals being moved from one place to another or dying, and yet we could have created a restocking area which has a well, has grass, has other things, and that may not cost that much money. So again, the question which comes, who has the responsibility? Is it the central government? Is it the county government? For instance, that ferry without the tail lifting up, who should have insisted that the tail be repaired? Or who should have insisted that there be a rope separating the ocean from the cargo or the people? Is that the responsibility of the county government, or is it the responsibility of the central government? And again, when I talk about creating villages, can we also think of creating a village where we have people in mind, where they can come, and we have even the infirmary, which is run by solar, and we have water running in those places, so that when the drought comes, we are able to have the people stay in those places for a while. And then the question then, who would bear that responsibility? In Kenya, we have a young lady who was being swept by a river, and she made a cry, which is the common cry for all Kenyans. Oh, serikali utusaidie. Oh, government, help us. Okay? Oh, government utusaidie. So everybody is looking for government. But which government? Who is the government at Atusaidia? Which is that government? And I want to leave with you the impression that the technologies are there. The will may not be there. And the means are there. When I look at the amount of money that we waste through tenderpreneurs in this country on projects which are not well executed, you find somebody who has never dug a dam, and you give him millions to come and dig a dam that is catching water. And then the next thing you hear, oh, the water was lost, oh, the water evaporated. Whose responsibility is that? And you who is silent, who don't talk about it, are you innocent? So I'm appealing to everybody that let us say it the way it is, take responsibility, and encourage us to do the protection and do the preparedness so that the next disaster is not as bad as the last disaster. We should always prepare for a better disaster. I think I've delivered my message.
Thank you very much, Professor Wandiga, for that very sharp, concise message. I think you can take from there the fact that we have had some ideas about what we can do actually in terms of preparedness, and also we have the responsibility thrown back to us in a way from what we were discussing in the morning. Some of that responsibility lies with us, and the technologies do actually exist to take us forward. So not to do a disservice to Professor Wandiga, let me just read a bit of his biography, and then I'll read that of the next speaker. So Dr. Shipman Dig is a professor of chemistry at the Department of Chemistry, University of Nairobi. He's also the acting director at the Institute for Climate Change and Adaptation. His research lies in studying sources and sinks of biogenic gases, persistent organic pesticides in the tropics, trace metal concentrations in the environment, and as well as climate change and health. He is principal investigator in a project that was called Capacity Building to Evaluate and Adapt to Climate Change-Induced Vulnerability to Malaria and Cholera in the Lake Victoria region. And of course, there are others which he has also participated in. And given his wide experience, he is able to give a lot of advice across many different disciplines, many different sectors as well. So I would like now to also we have our second speaker was to be Mr. James Odwor, but he has sent us a representative from the National Drought Operations Center, Mr. Tamiru. So I'd like to welcome him to come and make his presentation. Thank you. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much. I'm from the National Disaster Operations Center, not National Drought Management. My name is Dr. Martin Talian. I'm here to present on devolution process and natural disaster management in ASAL counties in Kenya. There are a few questions we just need to ask ourselves. Is devolution in Kenya a blessing or a curse? And just like my friend said, I don't want to be controversial. If you are seated close to a Kenyan friend, people are talking about controversial issues like BBI and Punguza Mzigo. This afternoon, I'm not going to talk about controversial issues. I'm going to stick to disaster risk management and how devolution has helped improve disaster risk management in this country. So we want to look at, has it actually been a positive or a negative? Kenya as a landscape is characterized by recurrent, slow, and fast onset natural disasters that aggravate suffering of vulnerable communities. The ASA disaster profile is dominated by drought and floods, just as my earlier presenters said. And in this country, ASAL cover about 89% of the total landmass and is home to about 36% of the total population. There are 29 counties. The counties are like the local governments, maybe in other countries. 29 ASAL counties out of 47 counties, which are the total devolved units in this country. The Constitution of Kenya, 2010, is the main legal backbone of the entire devolution structure. And the main objective of devolution in this country was to devolve power, resources, and representation. I just want to mention a few institutions in government and others that are out of government that are dealing with DRM, especially in the ASAL areas. The main institution is NDMA, National Drought Management Authority, that is dealing with issues of drought risk management. On matters of floods, we have got Water Resource Authority and the Ministry of Water and Irrigation. NDOC, which is National Disaster Operations Center, coordinates disaster responses in the entire country. That is for all the disasters. Kenya Red Cross has been on the forefront in humanitarian services in this country. As mentioned earlier, disaster risk management is a shared function between the national and the county governments. And to date, Kenya has no disaster law. We have been grappling about the legal and policy framework for quite some time. Imagine working for a policy for over 10 years, and up to now, we haven't been able to have the policy in place. I just want to go through the progress and the opportunities that devolution has offered this country in matters disaster risk management. I've talked about the bill, the National Disaster Risk Management Bill, together with the policy. They are actually in the pipeline. Most of these are still at Parliament for discussions, waiting approval. One of the major things that has happened is mainstreaming of disaster risk into long-term government development planning. At the national level, we have got what we call the medium-term plans. The medium-term plan 3 has mainstreamed DRM in all sectors. That has actually been a plus for this country. At county level, we have got a planning document called the County Integrated Development Plan, CIDP. Within the CIDP also, the counties have also been able to mainstream disaster risk management. Financial resources for DRM are also incorporated through ministries, state departments, and county governments. We have got actually the PFM Act, the Public Finance Management Act, that states that 2% of the total revenue, that is the total budget for the counties, goes to the DRM. And maybe what we should be asking ourselves is, the money given to the counties, is it actually used for the purpose it is intended to? That is DRM. We also have Government Disaster Contingency Fund, guided by Contingency Funds and County Emergency Funds Act 2011. And it's also good mentioning that most of the counties have also been able to put budgets in different sectors that actually cater for DRM. There have been efforts also in matters training through government and other stakeholders at national and county level to strengthen risk-informed policy development and resource allocation. Through most of the stakeholders, counties have been able to be trained on how to draft a policy and also how to be able to write, draft the bills. We have got less than 8 counties that have got policies and bills on DRM. You can imagine 8 out of 47. We still have a long way to go. And through UNDP, we have also been able to have hazard and risk assessment at county levels. 6 counties have benefited from that, where we have had 6 hazard atlases. And this is actually being utilized for county disaster risk information. Kenya Meteorological Department has also been able to devolve its functions to the county level, especially issues of early warning and advisories. The national government, through Ministry of Interior, is creating awareness through what we call Nyumba Kumi, that is the concept of 10 houses, through the chiefs, the assistant chiefs, and the structure that is under the Ministry of Interior. There are more efforts between collaboration between government and other stakeholders. And worth to mention is the issue of early warning, early action. This is something that we are working closely with Kenya Red Cross to see that this country comes up with an early warning, early action protocol to be able to handle multi-hazards. There are several challenges, but one of the key challenges that I want to mention here, and I know some more challenges will come up from the floor, together with how we can be able to tackle some of these challenges. One of them that I want to mention now is about the legal and the policy framework. This country needs a disaster risk management policy. It needs a disaster risk management act, that is the law, to be able to have a better coordination in the DRM sector, because you can realize the major challenge has been poor coordination. The mandate of National Disaster Operation Center is limited, and is limited because we don't have concrete legal infrastructure to be able to tackle issues on disaster risk management. And therefore, I want to end by saying that by strengthening devolution, we will also be strengthening DRM for this country. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Martin, also for that good exposition. So basically what we need is a policy framework and a legal framework in order to help us move forward. That is the big message that we are getting from him. And now I would like to then go on to the next presenter, who shall be Mr. Ahmed Ibrahim from ALDEF, Kenya. So Ahmed is a local and global champion of the localization agenda and devolved climate finance. He has 30 years of experience in humanitarian and development sectors. He has held several senior leadership, management, and operational posts with INGOs and NNGOs. He has worked with government, consultancy firms, and bilateral programs, and has managed large-scale famine crises in 2011, 2004-05, and was also involved in the tsunami, and also has assisted with IDPs. He has a BSc in engineering and MA in water resources management, and is the current CEO of the Arid Lands Development Focus Kenya, or better known as ALDEF. So welcome, and like your predecessors, I look forward to you keeping to 10 minutes. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I will go through. It's here. Okay. So basically, my presentation is mostly focused on Arid lands ecosystems. I'm also a convener of an ASAL humanitarian platform that was formed in 2016 and encompasses around 12 counties in Kenya, with over 30 local organizations as members. Some of them are within the audience. So already people have said what happens in ASAL, and I mean in Kenya, from a perspective of the situation we are in. Droughts have been mentioned. I just want you to glance through. If you really look at the tables that are up there in the last 10 years, there was either a drought or a floods or a combination of both in 1 year. So literally, if you go beyond now the 20 timelines of 2009 and beyond, and early 90s, the droughts were 5 years, then it came to 3 years, then 2 years. So right now, as we speak, we are facing a crisis where close to 3 million people are facing a crisis. So if you really look at it, and Kenya is being said does not have a policy, does not have all this, I just wanted us to look at it as we are talking. There's a drought emergency and a flood is hitting. So from that perspective, what is happening in the ASAL counties is that droughts and floods are not being seen as things that will come every other time. They have become frequent and therefore are just normal. New normal. So if they're becoming a new normal, what does it mean? If you really look at the 2018 and 2008-2011 drought and what were the losses that the country really experienced, is quite huge and not an easy thing to look at. Out of the severe drought, over 12.1 billion was lost. That year, 2008 to that period of time. That is not small money, of which 950 billion is assets, infrastructure related. Physical and durable assets, 64, and the rest of the others are losses that flow to the economy across the different sectors. But when you look at it, 72% is on the livestock. And the ASAL communities are dependent on livestock. If now I go through the ASAL, which already people know, that is the diagram. The brown one is the arid ones, the a bit yellowish ones are semi-arid. That was presented, close to 89% is arid. What is the purpose of now talking about that? if you really look at it, it means that the problems that are faced now in the ASAL from a perspective of livelihoods and the economic contribution the ASAL communities are giving, or arid lands are giving to Kenya, is that 60% of livestock and 50% of the meat that is consumed in Kenya comes from that region. And you know, the livelihood systems of that area are largely dependent because of the aridity. Pastoralism has been a key way of doing it. But if you look at the contribution of this livestock from a national perspective, then the economic contribution stands at 150, which is not being tapped for very well, close to 319 billion, higher than was previously thought. If you look at the population of sheep, 87% in Kenya come from that region, 91% of goats, 100% camels, and the national. So basically, if you're talking about Kenya with 89% like that, which originally was being seen as not marginally a contribution to the national, with frequent droughts and flooding, then it means we really are not going to tap into that kind of economy if we go on the way we are doing now. So what are the climate consequences and changes that we are seeing in the arid lands as well, or the whole of Kenya? Rainfall is very erratic. It either comes 40 days late, or it comes in storms, short durations, and then it's gone. From a climate change perspective, again, although this variation is observed across different things, then it means it's irregular, unpredictable, and then can cause floods very quickly. The ASALs on average have maximum temperatures, like the last summer. For example, Garissa, on a week that we observed, the highest was 43 degrees. The normal was 37. So things are changing very fast, and we need to take quick actions. Meanwhile, the climate change analysis on agriculture, which Kenya is said to be relying on, is also shrinking, and seriously shrinking. So if we now look at all these dynamics, the serious challenges that need measures within and across sectors is huge. We need to protect livelihoods, and therefore look at the food security of the people, which Kenya, as a government, is supposed to be responsible for. So basically, if you look at the ASAL now, there's increasing number of people who are facing crisis. Their inability to restore their livelihood, they can't recover at any one time. We talked to a family with camel and another family which had cattle, and you can't imagine the debt levels a cattle owner was facing. It's huge. They can't recover at any one time with the current scenarios. Then what they do is now they resort to destructive coping mechanisms. So in humanitarian response in Kenya now, coming back to it, generally it's largely cash, food aid, animal feed, NFIs, health and nutrition. Although lots of ground has been covered in terms of narrowing and lowering the number of deaths, the numbers are increasing. And largely it's because of ad hoc planning and budgeting allocations. So if the landscape is, as my predecessor has said before, then that will not be a sustainable way of government being able to be responsible for the food security of its constituents. From that perspective, what is in place? There's the Hunger, Safety and Net program. The government has put that in place in arid land counties. Over 100,000 households are being put on the other one of special programs. It's been talked about, 1.2 million people are getting, families are getting. There's the end in drought emergency. This framework 2014 to 2018, it was a 5-year program. What are the outcomes we yet to see? We would like to know that how does the humanitarian appeal system link up into the ending drought emergency itself, and the humanitarian planning and budgeting systems and release of funds is being done to who and where, and is it publicly accessible? These are the questions we need to ask. Now, I want to just present a little bit on that. What we would have liked to see in the HNSP is that we need to see it from a multidimensional approach, if at all it's going to be used for humanitarian response in this country. First of all, we need, currently 55,400 is given to elderly families with the elderly, which now means every 2 months. If a crisis hits, then you're still giving the individual 5,400 every 2 months. Will that person be able to cope with the crisis? No. So we would like to see the minimum expenditure basket being used and need to increase upwards when a crisis hits. So it has to be flexible and used as a surge model. So that will be one key thing. The second other aspect that the HNSP has is it has category 1 groups of 100,000 currently, although expansion is being planned under NDMA to Garissa, Tana River, and a number of other counties. The 4 counties, Turkana, Marsabit, Wajir, and Mandera, 100,000 households are getting it. And then when a crisis hits, category 2 scale up is done. However, we will talk about whether that is really being done. It's not been done. It will be good to see we use it as a scale-up model to more crisis-affected populations. It's already there, so why don't we use it well? Then the other aspect is instead of 2 months, when a crisis hits, why don't we give it as every 1 month? One major problem about the HNSP is it is 7 years old data. So what it does is it misses out on vulnerable children, pregnant and lactating mothers, which will have been good to capture. So having that data more frequent will be good. Now, the other diagram I wanted to is Kenya is the middle income. It has been talked about. So what does it mean? It means that the tax base is high. You are supposed to take more responsibility for that kind of thing. So more dollars should be available. So those dollars that are available should be used now for humanitarian response. When that happens, then when Kenya reaches a middle income, then it means that happens to it. Now I'll go to the gist of this thing. What we would have liked to see is that this mechanism, the government has the tax base, takes responsibility for its citizens, takes humanitarian responses as a core other aspect of its ways of working. And then we have a model linked to it, which is a humanitarian appeal system, which now different actors can access funds from. I want to give a small now what we did in 2019 as actors, local actors. We came together in 2016. We reactivated again in 2019. We went to some of our partners, asked for a no regrets envelope, and did a small response from as early as April, which now translated into scaling up slowly, and it used a varying level of amounts of money given to the vulnerable families, from 3,000 to 4,000 as the crisis was going, to 4,711 now as we speak, with more funding given by ECHO, and that is to 17,500. The support was channeled through a Kenya Cash Consortium, led by ACTED, Oxfam, and Concern, and worked in 6 counties, and that has really come up with what we are calling a networked approach, which we will have liked to see used in humanitarian responses in Kenya. Various actors come together, they work together and develop a mechanism that deals on the demands of the people, the government supply system, and strengthened such that that works. And then the different actors have different roles in it. And then we have a mechanism where we do follow-up, we do community-based targeting. We position it over with a mechanism in which targeting can be now seen as a real key thing. And then the minimum basket is based on how the crisis now evolves. And then joint monitoring is done from that perspective. So I don't want to go far, and I'll give a final way forward on the opportunities. And Kenya can gain a lot if it invests in good nutrition. That is a key thing. So if pregnant and lactating mothers and children up to 2 years are really covered very well, then you deal with it very well, then the numbers of people in crisis, and you will reduce it faster. Then we need to have a networked response. Donors' ability to release funds should not be politicized. So what we are talking about, for example, Red Cross recently did an appeal, and they did it in good time. However, the Kenyan public was unhappy with the duty bearer on the issues of tax, corruption, and accountability. So to avoid this, we need to be able to do proper awareness in advance. We need to know the funds are there, the response mechanisms, and where will it be done at. So budget allocation needs to be prioritized, and then we need to do a combination of three things: humanitarian, development, because once those two things are not working well, people will move to different locations and conflict comes. So that nexus approach is very important. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Ahmed. He has raised a number of different issues, and among them the network approach to dealing with responding to the issues from a humanitarian perspective. But one of the things he has said, which I would like also to point out, he mentioned the unusual temperatures in Garissa. And actually, this is another thing that we have to consider, which can undermine our efforts at mitigating flood and drought impacts. Because we're seeing, again, under climate change, we're expecting to see many more warmer days occurring. We're expecting to see more heavy one-day or multi-day floods coming out of really very short rainfall events. So while we might buffer against very major occurrences, we might have to deal with this increasing distress that is going to be caused, for example, by prolonged heat waves in an area. So that's something else to consider. Okay, we'll move on to our next presentation by the panelist, Alexandre Calder. I don't know if that is correctly pronounced, from UNEP. And I'll just say a little bit about him. Professor Alexandre Calder has more than 25 years experience in science and technology policy across academia, industry, government, and international organizations. Currently, he is the director in the United Nations Organization as Chief of Country Outreach Technology and Innovation Branch, which is in the Science Division of UN Environment. He has worked for the European Union, the African Union, quite a number of national governments worldwide, including being 6 years as the Chief of Government nominated by the Portuguese Prime Minister. So Alexandre Calder is Associate Professor of Information Science and Technology Policy Unit. He was a faculty fellow at Oxford University, which is where I did my PhD, the Oxford Internet Institute, and has also been for more than 13 years a research associate of Oxford University. So welcome, Monsieur Alexandre.
Oh, thank you for the kind words. On behalf of UN Environment, I'd like to thank the organizers, the Fondation Croix-Rouge Française, IRD, and the International Center for Humanitarian Affairs. It's, I say it very honestly, it's quite an opportunity for UN Environment to share with these humanitarian, in this humanitarian context. And I would say if I can share with you this afternoon one message is exactly this combination of efforts from the three pillars, from the humanitarian, from the peace and security, and the sustainable development one. I think without that nexus, as Ibrahim, the previous speaker, referenced before, is almost impossible given the nature of the challenge that we have ahead. Let me just give you from, this way. Professor Wanig has expressed the 2 Ps on prevention and preparedness, and I would add the 3 Ps of people, places, and planet, which are representative of the 3 pillars of the UN. The scale that we are facing has a tremendous complexity because global scale events such as temperature anomalies, which are risking to reach the level of 1.5 degrees in just 2 decades. If that happens, that immediately has tremendous drought and flood effects all over the world. But moreover, some small island development states from the Pacific to the Atlantic will get half or completely submerged. So the scale is from the very global to the tremendous local impact of events. And this is a characteristic of the environment and the climate and all environmental effects. So that's the first key message is either you start on the very local or on the truly global. It doesn't really matter because the scale of the effects and the disasters are overarching on the whole spectrum. And with such a reality, prevention and preparedness are the only possibility, at least to mitigate the tremendous humanitarian, conflictual, as well as development effects of all these things. I'll give you another example I keep going back, which I should go forward. The trends on atmospheric and air pollution. More than 1 million children below the age of 14 die every year of air pollution diseases, direct air pollution diseases. So this also means that the effects grow from the very young to the elderly, cross-sectional to whole society. Again, in a small change in the way we grow our cities and a small change on our patterns of carbon dioxide and a small change in the PM 2.5 indicator. What I'm trying to say is that the scale of the challenge that we have ahead really are cross-pillars, cross-sectional, cross-society, and require really a response that I think needs to be much more innovative than the ones we have been putting forward in all regards. This is one opportunity for the use of forests to protect from cyclones. We can also plan, or at least prepare, for these kind of things and try to analyze. The big problem is that probably UN Environment keeps on secret some of these layers of information on forestation and how forests in a specific island in the Pacific can be used. Whereas you, humanitarians, and WFP on the ground, the UNHCR on the ground, and the counties and the countries on the ground could be using these on near real time or as information for action on the ground to protect for it. The same goes on the protection of Ramsar sites. Imagine how can we believe that a Ramsar site protected by nature during 15 years, well, more than 15 years, 20 years time, we can see what happened to the protection. It's no longer protected because you have a number of buildings growing in the middle of the Ramsar site. What I'm trying to say is that the more examples I could find, and I could go on and on, given the reason of time, the monitoring systems, whether they are on the air, whether they are on water, on land. This is the network of monitoring sensors for water, for the availability of water, as well as the water quality spread globally. But you can see that in Africa, in Latin America, in the Caribbean, you have quite a good density of monitoring stations that would allow us to get monitoring for preparedness for disasters with some anticipation. And then you can go to the oceans. In 1950, humanity was throwing 1.5 million tons of single-use plastics. The latest count was 300 million, as now. And if things go as they are, I'm very fortunate. We live in a country, Kenya, that took immediate action on single-use plastics and the complete ban on that. But if things go as they are now, the estimates are, I think, I can use that. So 1950, 1.5 million, now 300 million, will be 1.8 billion in 2050. That's the estimates for the impact of single-use plastics. A portion of these, I would say around 15%, go to the oceans. And of course, go to the oceans, and then from the oceans go to the whole ecosystem back again to our lives and then to our survival. What I'm trying, my first message is very clear. We really have, the challenge we have ahead is tremendous. It goes from global to local, local to global, cross-sectional around all society, and it needs multi-stakeholder intervention to impact on that. What is UN Environment trying to do? First, we trying to catch up with the reality. This was an example of peace and security, just to bring the peace and security people in. Most of these conflicts we see from Afghanistan to Colombia, Sudan, Nigeria, they have natural resources causes. We can identify the extractives and mines in Afghanistan and Colombia. We can identify water in Nigeria. We can identify a number of natural resources related with peace and conflicts. To say again, all these interrelated at the very nature. What UN Environment is trying to do now is to stocktake these things in a single entry door. We're trying to establish an operational center, which we call the situation room. The situation room, as the military are very much used to that, is to bring together all the different pieces of information to act on a certain crisis or on a certain event. What we're trying to consider is that the whole environment is a crisis, is an emergency, and we're trying to bring to a situation room of the environment the different pieces of the puzzle. And you cannot imagine how difficult this has started to be, and we have a plan for the forthcoming 6 years to do it and to try to integrate this picture. Because all these pieces of information I was giving to you usually are coming from all different sites, all different across UN Environment, different agencies and different partners as well. So for ourselves, the second message is there's a lot of work to do ourselves in order to bring this together, to be useful for society, for humanitarians, for agencies on the ground, for the countries, for the national governments on the ground. And my last message is the following. For our task across UN Environment, we found out that the only way to do this was through a partnership model. And we have set up a partnership that you can see in the map, global partnership, involving partners from other international agencies, UN and non-UN agencies. We have set up a partnership that includes private companies, the business sector, a partnership that includes citizens and citizen associations, and includes also the more technological and research centers, the academy world. So that's the only way at UN Environment that we found out to cope with this challenge, is to craft a partnership model where we're going to move with the partners to provide these kind of solutions in the future, as now as in the future. And I think this is the most critical message, I think. Given the lack of resources, being the human resources, financial resources, or time to react, the only model that we found out possible and effective was this partnership model to tackle the solutions. This is to say, if we look it doesn't matter if we look at Kenya or if you look at any other of the 193 countries in the world, we use the same model of partnership to address the solution for that. My last message is clear, and it comes from the savannah. It doesn't really matter the species, but we have to act together and really I'm really happy. I've been learning. I could not be from the very beginning of the session in the morning, but I was in half of it. And I'm learning a lot what does mean for humanitarian perspective. for entities on the ground really act on humanity. We think we can work with you as part of environment, as part of UN environment and the environmental dimension. And we need to bring in the peace and security dimension pillar as well. So the picture there is a representation that only acting together doesn't matter different species. And it doesn't really matter also whether we are on land or on the oceans. But again, if we don't work together, we cannot achieve this humanitarian challenge. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Professor Calder, for that exposition. I think one thing that I picked up from what you said is that these changes are so complex and intertwined and interrelated that we need new innovative solutions. And I think he also presented to us some ways in which we can get that kind of data using remote sensors or other types of information which is available, which can help us to move together in dealing with these issues, as we also come up with partnership models which can help us to advance the different small different things that we are doing in different areas to alleviate human suffering and to take care of our environment. One of the things that he has been raised not only by himself but by others, and which I would also like to just reflect on a bit before we have our discussant come in, is the issue of data. It had been mentioned in the morning by Nick, I think asked a question about data. And you know, without data, you cannot really deal with issues like risk management. It is very hard to quantify that. And as was mentioned, for example, I've been doing some work up in Turkana, and I was looking for data on the many drilled boreholes in the area, and I just couldn't find it. Someone mentioned that there's particular, like NGOs which normally do this kind of work, within 5 or 10 years, they have a complete turnaround of the stuff, and nobody knows where this data is. You know, it's the kind of data which we are spending a lot of money on now trying to duplicate to get, and yet these data exist. So that network approach, which has also been said by Ahmed, is really something that is important. And it's a network not only from our points of view, but from all the aspects of things that we need to pick up and to deal with the issues. Now, not to make a speech myself, we now have our discussant, who is Djohy from Benin. Djohy, I hope I pronounced it correctly, is an anthropologist and also agricultural engineer. It's a nice combination there. He studied agricultural economics and rural sociology at the Faculty of Agricultural Sciences in the University of Parakou, Benin, and holds a PhD in social anthropology from the Faculty of Social Sciences, University of Göttingen in Germany. He served as a research associate at Göttingen Institute for Social and Cultural Anthropology, and has been recently enrolled as postdoctoral researcher and lecturer at the University of Parakou, Benin. He has been involved in studies among Fulani pastoralists with a focus on environmental and socio-technological changes, livelihood diversification, gender and power relations. He has interests in climate change and localization, land use, rural development, local innovation, and grassroots political organizations. So welcome, Dr. Djohy.
Thank you. I'd like to thank you for being here because I'm very happy. I'm practically the one or some of the very scarce scientists from the West African countries who are here in this room for this meeting, and I'm very happy to be among you and to share also the perspective from the West African countries, and also to pick up some of the key points that was raised by my co-panelist. Yeah, by coming here, I do not want you to look at me as a kind of contradictor of humanitarian expert, someone who just come to find the list in the head of humanitarian experts, because when I started research on humanitarian aid in Benin, people always think that, okay, when I come for interview, when I come for visit, when I come for observation, people always look at me as somebody who just come to say something wrong. that humanitarian action is being wrongly implemented in our countries. But I'm very happy that the first panel also gives us a new perspective that we can really look at ourselves as partners and see how research, academics, and humanitarian action and experts can work together for the well-being of our local communities. Because the main purpose of all we are doing as researchers, as humanitarian actors, is how we can improve the well-being, the condition of our communities, our people. So I really want to first to share with you that, like we have been hearing about Kenya and other countries in East Africa, West Africa is also affected by the climate change. And we have evidence on this aspect. I am not from natural science background, but I have been reading research, I have been receiving information from colleagues who have done a lot on this area and show that climate change is affecting communities. And successive droughts and floods in the Sahel and other West African countries are really weakening the livelihoods of local communities, driving sometimes this community in a kind of vicious cycle of marginality and poverty. And recent studies have also shown that both Sahelians and coastal countries in West Africa are vulnerable. Sometimes when we say West Africa, people only look at Sahel and consider that only Sahel, Niger, Burkina Faso, and other countries who are vulnerable to climate change, but other countries, coastal countries, especially Benin, Côte d'Ivoire, and other countries are also vulnerable to climate change. And then humanitarian aid is an important resource in this context, and its place in the rehabilitation and reconstruction of life is already well established. It allows communities, for example, to renegotiate crisis situations, to rebuild their livelihoods, and sometimes to reinterpret the disaster and difficult conditions to seize opportunities to diversify their way of life. So this is already something important. It is also useless to recall that here and elsewhere, humanitarian aid administered in a very skillful and intelligent manner really help communities to rebuild and transform their life when they are going under pressure and under stress from different environmental crises. However, some study that we conducted through the funding from the French Red Cross Foundation suggests that more attention should be paid, and that humanitarian aid should be reshaped in a way to better adapt to the requirements of the humanitarian transition and the ongoing localization process. I'd like to share with you three key points on the finding that we got from those research. First is that humanitarian aid must increasingly take into account the institutional context and the devolution architecture and the related top issues. We have to look at the rules and the regulation that really shape the humanitarian intervention in our local context. It's not a matter of considering the Sahel, considering the coastal countries, or considering the Eastern African countries, but to have a more site-specific and really actor-oriented localization of aid. A study I personally conducted in the flooded area of Niger River in northern Benin revealed that the fact that local collectivities, for example, have become the aid laboratory. We have a kind of humanitarian protocol that put the mayor and the local councils as a chief, a lead of implementation, mobilization and implementation of aid. So in this context, for example, all the humanitarian aid experts has to work under the control of the local community government. But these people are always considered as political, and the decision and implementation of of aid is always shaped by the affiliation to different political chapters. If you work in this context or you implement aid in this context without taking into account the processes ongoing on the ground, by considering the clanship, the territorialities, and the political relations that shape the behavior and the interaction between beneficiaries of aid, political actors, and humanitarian aid payers, then you will not achieve the goal. The second point is that humanitarian aid must take greater account of the perception and the aspiration of the beneficiaries. Most of the time, intervention is like, we look at beneficiaries as like they don't have aspiration, they don't have perception. Even in the context of localization, we don't consider that people, okay, we just said that we have local NGOs, we have local humanitarian experts, and then provide them resources and capacity building will just help to improve aid localization. But it's not true, because when you look at yourself as local actors, how do the beneficiaries look at you? How do they perceive you? Are they perceive you as local? Is Red Cross Benin or Care International Benin Togo perceived by beneficiaries of aid as local actors, for example? And this completely shape and completely change the dynamics and the relationship between the actors in the context of aid implementation. So our various studies in Benin, and one of my colleagues, Mariama in Niger, revealed that recipients with regard to the local issues even prefer sometimes the aid provided by the international humanitarian aid actors. A localization of aid cannot succeed in this context if it is blind and aligned with the goodwill of the diktat of some few actors who want or who aspire that localization should be implemented to empower them. And this is what we call the kind of building local power in the village. There is a need then for intelligent localization that detects the games on the ground, uncover the stakes, and focus really on the beneficiaries and their aspirations. The third point I'd like to share is that humanitarian aid must be more innovative faced with innovative recipients. Generally, humanitarian experts will say that we have a time constraint, we have resource constraint, we have this and that. And most of the time, they look at recipients of aid as simply passive and amorphous actors. They don't consider that they are in the face of active and innovative actors that even in a very difficult context always find their way to innovate, to access resources, to use the very scarce and small resources they have to design the new trajectories, to diversify their livelihood, and is always something that is missed in the intervention of humanitarian actors. It is not a matter of supporting, for example, small subsistence economy. One of my colleagues who was in Burkina Faso recently showed that how the support to the women has become a kind of supporting small, only subsistence economy, without really looking at how we can propel these actors to become more innovative, to design and rely on innovation to improve really their well-being and also to take advantage of the greater context in which they live. It is then important to go beyond the argument of time limits to really focus on sustainability with more long-term resilience projects. We are not always where with amongst people, I said, then we have to think that people initiate new form, for example, of land use, new occupation, and new livelihood trajectories. Speed of intervention is okay, but quantity and quality of the intervention are very important for the beneficiary. When we study, we implemented this study from the beneficiary perspective. It is also important to consider that capacity building has to focus on what is already there. And we have seen, for example, in Niger that the beneficiary, they want to have insurance cover, but they don't have resources to have this kind of insurance cover because they can't really comply with the condition of insurance, the market insurance. So these are important things that should be considered. So this requires, as I said, intelligent and well-targeted support for greater effectiveness. So by summarizing, I would like to share some of the key points that my predecessor presented and show that preparedness, yeah, intervention, okay, but preparedness and prevention could also help to avoid disasters and also help involve communities in a kind of planning the resilience projects. And who could be responsible for that? We don't have to consider that, okay, it's only local governments or the central government or the humanitarian aspect, or academics. All actors have to come together and look at the innovation that exists, the technology that are already there, and how we can work together to build on that. Disaster management is shared by all of us, and the evolution should be looked at as an opportunity for successful aid localization. The challenge is now to improve institutional environments and resource allocation, accountability, and innovation. All this will not be achieved without constraints and challenges, and we have to face this. You have to set up a kind of resources or protocols or contests that allow people to interact and to partner. As Alessandro just said, the only successful model that can work for all of us is how we can come to partner, considering time, considering resources, considering knowledge in a kind of mutual learning process. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much. With those reflections, we want to come to you at the floor to ask your questions, give your comments, and interact in whatever way you deem fit at this moment in time. So we have just about 27 minutes to do this. We have to break exactly on time for the tea. Otherwise, the next session will be delayed. So I'm ready. Question 1. I'm going to give you numbers. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Keep your number. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5.
Thank you very much, everyone who has given us quite insightful presentations. My question goes to Dr. Djohy. In regards to the research that has taken place in the Western Sahel.
Name and where you are work, please.
Oh, sorry.
Introduce yourself.
Cecilia Kituri from ICRC. So there was a recent study that just came out to show that the Lake Chad Basin, actually, and the whole connection that has been related to the peace and security issue and the declining resource of the Lake Chad has actually, is quite the contrary. In fact, the Lake Chad is not reducing, but is actually increasing in size. And so therefore, this whole ecosystem of humanitarian aid and everything that has been built around it has always pegged its basis on the fact that there was a natural resource and a scarcity about it. That obviously indicates, of course, the importance of having academic research influencing as well the humanitarian action, etc. But because of this scarce resource and how people have benefited from it, how do you then reverse something that has gone on for so long, where so many actors are involved and have benefited from it? And so giving back the empowerment to the people who live there, perhaps that was my question. How do you then reverse all that has taken place over the years?
Sorry, I just have a small announcement because one car is parked outside and is going to be removed. So if someone here has a car with the plaque KBC 622C, then I think you go quick and park the car somewhere else, because it is going to be moved now, right now. Sorry.
Thank you very much. My name is Deko Shalo from Kenyatta University. Throughout my life in academics, I used to ask myself, arid and semi-arid areas, do they require humanitarian aid? Or do they need to be transited to development? Why am I saying that? Let me give you a few statistics. In Kenya, areas that are prone to disaster are areas in this country that have got adequate resources, natural resources. Take for the case of the former Northeastern province. That area have got 60% of livestock population in this country. And it supplies 30% of the meat that is consumed in this country. This is one region that have the highest potential for renewable energy. And yet, Kenya government spends 6.4 billion to generate power through private entities called independent power suppliers. These are people who use generators to supply energy. This is one region that has the highest potential of wind energy. Now, the same area have one of the biggest underground water resources. Lawrence Swamp, studies that have been done in 1965 by the colonial government, reveals that Lawrence Swamp have underground water as big as Lake Victoria. In fact, they say it is the future potential for water supply to Nairobi. Now, a region that has that much potential is every time exposed to disaster. If we can take some deliberate measure where we only develop the solar energy, so that we do away with these independent power suppliers, and we pump 64 billion shillings to that area will not require any human assistance. So, is there a possibility now the humanitarian organization transit from dealing with human crisis to human development and resource development in that area? Thank you very much. And by the way, a country like Israel, have we ever heard of Israel asking for humanitarian aid? One time, I'm happy to have here my former vice.
Excuse me, I'm sorry to have
Let me just finish that point.
So
let me just finish.
Others can have some time. We have a short time.
Let me just conclude.
Okay, take 30 seconds, please.
One time we were visited when we were a student at Nairobi University, and I'm happy to have my deputy vice chancellor here. We used to have a guest speaker from Israel, And he visited Northeastern and said that area is not poor, it's resource rich. So I think we need to copy a lot of things from those regions and see how we can transit from humanitarian aid to human development and resource development. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. Actually, it's good to follow on from my neighbour's question or comment. My name is Sarah with the Norwegian Refugee Council. Just to the speakers, thank you. I'm interested in that we are still using the term natural disaster. I think most of us know that there isn't very much entirely natural about droughts or flooding nowadays, especially in a context like the Asals of Kenya. I'm just wondering if you could give us an idea of what efforts are underway or planned to address the issues that underlie these things in the northeast or in the dry lands of Kenya, because we know there is overgrazing, there is massive deforestation, there is unmanaged land use and things like that, a lot of which is based on the fact that people still do not have enough or any adequate alternative to firewood to cook their food with 3 times a day. I think that's an issue for the humanitarian community that I belong to also, that we haven't actually addressed that issue adequately yet. But without an ecology, we have no economy. So what are we doing to address this, to reverse this degradation and so forth with solutions that we know? And how can the humanitarian sector play a role in that? Thank you.
Thank you. My name is Serge Mouton. I'm from Mo University, but I'm originally from Benin, studying master's degree in forced migration theory. So my question is to Dr. Djohy. Throughout your presentation, you said that humanitarian responding, they always complain we have limited time and also resource constraints. My first question is, do you mean that humanitarian respondent and should wait for researchers to find the right way or the right response toward humanitarian aid? And the second one, do you really think that policymakers and researchers can work hand in hand in Africa towards humanitarian response? Thank you.
Yeah. These are basically 4 questions. I can take maybe 2 more before I come back to the panel. So, Madam, yes.
Good afternoon. My name is Evelyn. I work for Plan International. I'm just concerned and wondering, as humanitarian aid stakeholders here, we have been having a lot of floods and droughts in the Asal area. And I look at 2017, we had a drought that had an impact on the Asal area. Immediately we had floods. My question to the team, Ahmed and I forgot his name from the NDOC. What are the measures? What measures are we putting in place to harness the water? Because it beats logic for me to be tracking water. In a few months, there is floods. What measures can we have? And also look at what we are saying. We are looking at the ending drought in emergency framework. We have a framework. What has been the progress? And this should not be to the government or the NGO. When we look at the ending drought in emergency framework, is there progress? And who is to be held accountable? We need to really think about it, because if a framework has been developed and we have a very clear roadmap, we need to look at how are we progressing through it. Thank you.
Okay, the last one at the back, and then we'll come back to the panelists.
Thank you very much. My name is Eunice Donga from Refugee Consortium of Kenya. My question goes to the CEO of ALDEF and the officer from NDUC. And I'm particularly just wanting to know, what ideas do you have? Where have we failed as humanitarian workers or as aid agencies? Because in some of those areas where we are having a lot of drought and flooding, we know that we have been there for many, many years. And we are not seeing any change. What is it that we are not doing well? And what can we do better? Because we can be saying the same things every year, but still facing the same challenges every other year, and learning to the same legions again and again, but maybe we are doing things the same way. What is it that we need to change in the way we are doing things? Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. So we can get responses to those questions. Maybe I'll just start off from here and the panelists can take it to the left up to the end. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. I have some of the questions directly addressed to myself. The first one is about the scarcity of resources and how actors are really working together to solve some of these issues. I can say that you know there are some contradiction in the way we understand and we express scarcity, but from the beneficiary point of view, my experience in Benin is that local community always found that the access to resources now is really difficult compared to the situation in the past. This can be directly related to some climatic disaster. There can also be, you know, worse or supported by some political issues, some, you know, intervention that also bring the situation more difficult for the community. For example, if you have land issue for pastoralists, someone talked about pastoralists, where you have people who have been living on land for so long, even if the disasters are also already affecting them, you know, bringing investors in those areas, promoting more agriculture, crop farming above pastoralism also really affect this community. So from the beneficiary point of view, we can have different type of risk or different type of uncertainties that can really affect the access to resources. But the problem is how different actors from the background and from the intervention, the war, come together to really understand the problem of the community and try to solve it from the ground. And we try, for example, we conduct some study in the northern part of Senegal, where we try to see, for example, if we can bring community together in a kind of, you know, planning, local planning, and see what are the perceptions about the resources, what are the issues they are facing, and how they themselves perceive the solution that could be brought to solve the issue. This kind of action also helps sometimes to bring some contradiction, to come together and to find sustainable solution in some of the problems. So this, I can say that partnering from the different background, from different perspectives, can also be a way of different actors to come together to better understand the problem from the ground and also solve it in another way. Another issue is, okay, thank you. Another question directed to my presentation is how I'm not saying that humanitarian actors should wait for the research to come to an end, to deliver the finding, and so before they operate on the ground. But you know that in the past, they have already researched, and they have already knowledge that we can learn from. But the main issue is this gap that exists between those who are on the ground, those who are operating directly with the beneficiaries, and the researchers. For example, if you know really that on the ground, social networking is really important for local communities, and solidarity action is really important for them, you won't just go to an area and give biscuits to the children who you design or who you selected as really in need of food, or in terms of malnourished children. We observe something in northern Benin is like when humanitarian operator they came and they make kind of depistage, something like that, and they classify the children and say that, okay, these are more vulnerable, others are not vulnerable, and they just distribute the biscuit to the children. As soon as they go back to the office, the community, the household who benefited from this biscuit distributed, they brought all the biscuit together within the household and distributed to all the children within the community. So those who benefited also, who were not selected, also benefited from this kind of action. If research have already shown that locally...
I'm going to ask George to just kind of, because we are really running out of time.
Okay, to put it short, is
sorry,
like
I just
they
need
have
to
already
excuse
have
me,
research.
just hold it. I'll let you finish. We'll have just 2 minutes left for each of the panelists. So please just be aware of that time because we really must just block it off.
Okay.
So I'm going to give you 20 seconds to finish.
Okay, so
for sure.
Okay, it's my brother, so after the panel we can continue discussion. It's like we have already research and funding and knowledge exists, then we can just build on that. It's not a matter of waiting for research. We can still continue researching, but it's also important to come together to see what already exists as knowledge and how we can take this into account in our daily operation on the ground. Yeah.
Let me attempt to answer the question about arid and semi-arid lands. There are two limitations in the exploitation of arid and semi-arid lands. One of them is storage of energy. Even if we put the whole of arid and semi-arid lands under solar panels, we would not have a storage capacity to hold that energy. We don't have a reliable storage capacity. Knowledge and technology has not reached there. They are building some, but still not there. That's the first one. The second one is resources to convert the whole area into solar panels. Again, that resources is not available within us. So there's technology and financial resources. With respect to water, yes, there may be water, but it is safe. Is it safe for human use? Is it safe for agriculture? Rift Valley as a whole has a high content of fluoride in the groundwater. And fluoride would cause more damage than using it. So we have to make sure that that water is safe. And thirdly, when it comes to wind, Kenya government has just introduced 300 megawatts into the grid from wind power. And I believe there will be more such wind harvesting in the future. I hope I've attempted to answer you and give you the way to look at it. It is not that there is no will. If you take the capacity of the people in that area to use the technology which is available, it is not there. And some of us who are in Nairobi are so comfortable to go and work in those hard areas.
Well, I just like to read from many of the questions that were put together that it doesn't really matter for international organizations as ours if they can come together to work together and to partner if they don't respect fully the local context and the people and the places that are at stake. So it's clear that the knowledge, the local knowledge, the context, the actual communities, that the resources that exist in one place drive most of everything that we can do at all levels. So I think that's the very beginning point for almost all humanitarian intervention and development. So basically, that I could read that, and I take that as a very important lesson from the audience.
Yeah, I believe we can do better. I think the issue is still on overemphasis on response, that is being reactive instead of being proactive. And we have got fragmented initiatives. especially in government, you'll realize that maybe several departments, several ministries are dealing with one thing. So this kind of fragmented way of handling issues actually affects the output. And therefore, there's need to harmonize some of these initiatives. And like I said, the only thing that will help us is to have, to strengthen the policy and legal framework so that we have a clear way of doing things, a clear way of coordinating issues so that we can be able to achieve a lot on disaster risk management. And again, we need to build capacity of the counties. If we build capacities for the counties, I think we can be able to see more achievements than what we are seeing right now.
Thank you for the questions on the ASAL. For me, I'll put it this way. Unless we have the dimension of climate risk taken into planning, and then each of the different arms of government, let's say at national or even county, they look at what kind of hazards are they exposed to. What is the level of damage and loss as a result of that? What kind of interventions do we need to put in place? And so when you're choosing the interventions, you put the one that can give you the best returns. Unless that becomes a norm in the ASAL areas, then we'll be investing in interventions that do not make sense. So we need to go in that direction of climate risk as a keystone of planning and even for humanitarian issues. Everything then will work well. The second other one is the disaster management frameworks from a grassroots approach need to be interconnected with a national framework which is clear, and therefore funding and the appeal systems are clear, then we can be able to do the same things. The last census of livestock done in that area is a long time ago, I think in early 70s. Huge numbers of animals are there, so natural selection. After every drought, numbers and numbers are lost. So then land use issues also. So within all that kind of thing, if there's no proper rangeland management, then we don't use climate risk planning, and then we don't have a proper disaster management framework and how they're interlinked, then we'll be going round and round and round.
Okay, thank you very much. I know there may be some unsatisfied, not answers, questions that were asked, but maybe not to the extent that you wanted them to be dwelt into because of the time limitation. I would urge you to get hold of the panelists and the discussant during the coffee break and exhaust that aspect, those questions that you have that are still burning. What I'd want to do now is to thank all the panelists and the discussants for spurring us on to a very active and vibrant session. Many questions, and I know